What happened at CERN on July 7th, 2022? CERN had just turned their Large Hadron Collider back on after a long absence and was in the midst of an experiment. On the day of the experiment, July 7th, strange things happened involving the Earth's geomagnetic field and the electronic grid. SpaceWeather.com reported a G1 class geomagnetic storm that day. Was CERN and the tremendous power that they generate in their experiments responsible? The world immediately began asking these kind of questions, but the elites and the media just shut these discussions down. And what is the real purpose of CERN? Is it a scientific purpose, or does it play a role in the spiritual battle between good and evil, matter and antimatter, Christ and Antichrist, darkness and light? And are the elites of this world supporting that spiritual component and trying to hide it? Just look at the names chosen for some of these particles. Dark matter, the opposite of light. Antimatter, the God particle. And look at some of the ancient gods honored by these elites. Even their logo carries some resemblance to the number 6. Can you see it? Can you also see 666 in this logo? 666, of course, is the number of the name of the beast, and many can see it in this logo. This is Bible teacher Nelson Walters, and today we're going to examine the spiritual reality behind much of the so-called science at CERN and the political forces supporting this place, their plans for the future, and how this may fit into Bible prophecy. Now, CERN is the home of a Large Hadron Collider, as we said, that smashes atomic particles into each other to study things like antimatter, dark matter, and perhaps get particles to exceed the speed of light. It sounds like science to me, but according to a CERN insider, being around antimatter that they've been developing for too long can cause one to have nightmares, become aggressive, or even go crazy. The University of California at Berkeley was one of the first places where CERN stored this substance. And ironically, at that time, it was also the site of one of the most violent protests of our time. The violence broke out primarily between alt-right and alt-left activists. Many of the alt-right activists were members of the cult of Kek. The cult of Kek worships the ancient Egyptian god of chaos by that name. Interestingly enough, Japan has a particle collider, a smaller one than CERN, named Kek. And CERN itself has a statue of Shiva on their grounds. Shiva is the Indian god of destruction. CERN is built near a town in France called Saint-Genès-Polay, which once was the site of a temple of Apollo, the Greek god of destruction, who is famously mentioned in Revelation 9 as Apollyon, king of the bottomless pit. So we've got Egyptian god of destruction, Indian god of destruction, Greek god of destruction. Do you notice a pattern? Now, the area where they built CERN is mountainous and borders on both France and Switzerland. The technical difficulty of building in that mountainous region and the regulatory difficulty of using land in two different nations makes this probably one of the most unlikely spots in the world to build their collider. But this is the spot they chose. So was it for spiritual reasons? Because of that temple to Apollyon, is the god of chaos and destruction manifesting himself through antimatter and dark matter? And are governments and elites of this world hiding that fact that they are intentionally trying to summon dark forces? We're looking at all that today. Can science and the physical world be linked to the spiritual? That's a good question. When we look at the violent governments here in our modern world, we tend to blame it on stupid humans and bad policy. But the Apostle Paul is pretty clear in Ephesians 6:12 that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the forces of cosmic evil in heavenly places. And it also harkens back to Genesis 11 and Deuteronomy 32:8, where God assigned the nations to the control of angelic sons of God after the rebellion at the Tower of Babel. So politics overlap the spiritual, and there are dark powers at work behind the violent empires of our world. And when we say violent empires, you would normally think of places like Russia. But this also includes the Western democracies who have primarily sponsored CERN. CERN is run by 23 member states, although they're trying to kick Russia out, each of which has 2 official delegates to the CERN Council. One represents the government, and the other represents their national science interests. So we have to ask, is what's happening at CERN in the scientific realm part of that battle between the 2 spiritual realms? Are the scientific experiments there linked to Satan's overall plan for world domination? Getting back to that fateful day, July 7th, 2022, the day of the experiment at CERN, for over 14 hours, the Earth's vital geomagnetic field that protects us, from the sun's radiation was weakened to the extent the solar wind was able to pass through a massive gap that had been torn open. This, in turn, caused a fluctuation in the global electrical grid. Now, while that incident was short-lived and the world's electrical grid returned to normal within a few hours, no one can be sure as to what exactly happened that time on that day. Was the CERN experiment that they were running on that same day only a coincidence? When you're talking about the Large Hadron Collider and physics experiments at this level, their stated purpose is to mimic the energies released at the creation of the universe. The energy needed to pull apart atoms, and enough to create antimatter, something, they've admitted to having accomplished. What is the impact of such power surges? Well, no one really knows. They don't know. We mentioned antimatter and dark matter. Now, do these fit into their plans and the plans of Satan? What impact are these things having on the scientists of CERN? Are the workers themselves being affected? This is Darwin's crowd who dismissed the Bible, but they are becoming believers in the dark side. One of the directors at CERN, Sergio Bertolucci, director of research and scientific consulting, admitted their experiments are designed to open other dimensions beyond the normal 4 of height, length, depth, and time. Out of this door might come something, he said, or we might send something through it. He said that back in 2009. So the idea of summoning a dark force has always been there, and admittedly so. And as we stated earlier, they have placed a statue of a dark force on their administrative grounds. They have put the Indian god Shiva out there dancing through a fiery portal, out of another dimension and into this world. That's what it pictures. Shiva is appropriately known, as we said, as the Destroyer. Then, as many of you also know, the scientists and staff at CERN held and filmed a mock human sacrifice in front of the statue of Shiva. This video is infamous on the internet. It was a horrible prank, but one for which those involved were not punished, at least not publicly. What does this say about the politicians and the leaders at CERN that they would condone this? Speaking of pranks, CERN also put out a press release jokingly saying that they had destroyed 5 parallel universes in one of their experiments. Dark humor for those possibly invested in the dark arts. Those behind CERN built their accelerator in the vicinity of the ancient temple of Apollo, as we said. The same spiritual being as Shiva, both were the destroyer in their native cultures, the same being the Bible refers to as the king of the bottomless pit. Is that bottomless pit, then, another dimension? And is that who they are trying to summon into this world? Apollyon. But how does antimatter, the God particle, and especially the Bible fit into all this? Let's start with antimatter. Is antimatter found in a separate dimension, a parallel dimension? One idea was that the universe itself formed as a pair, our matter universe and a similar antimatter universe. This is a theory of many scientists. Now, when antimatter and matter interact, they annihilate each other, and mass is converted completely into energy, specifically into gamma rays, a massive release of energy. Could this be the way that the other dimension is opened? And given that vast energy release, what if a terrorist got a hold of some of this antimatter? You talk about blackmailing a whole nation, or maybe even the whole world. It's dangerous, dangerous material, much more powerful than nuclear explosions. At present, there are over 30,000 colliders of various sizes, what we also call particle accelerators, and these are found around the world. CERN is the biggest. But when did these things start showing up? I feel like I haven't heard about them until just recently. Apparently, they've been around since the 1930s. Why do they want these machines everywhere? Is it to bring as much antimatter into the world as they possibly can? Well, that's a possibility. The Higgs boson, the so-called God particle, has also been theorized as a key to opening up other dimensions. CERN freely talks about working with D-Wave Systems, a quantitative computing company that claims in TED Talks its machines work by, quote, collaborating with parallel universes. Is it possible our universe is becoming slowly entangled with another bit by bit? Again, maybe, and maybe that's the plan. Even the atheists, Stephen Hawking, feared dark matter and the God particle, saying these things could lead to doomsday. I just don't think it's the type of doomsday that atheists think about. Elon Musk was even more blunt, calling CERN demonic technology. So is it? Let's look at what the Bible says about it. Where does the opening of another dimension or the bottomless pit happen in the Bible? As we stated, this maybe is the gate of hell, which opens in Revelation 9. Now, 2 chapters earlier than Revelation 9 and Revelation 7, the door of heaven opens, and the great multitude leads the earth and enters heaven. After the saints are safely before the throne, God permits the gate of hell to open to give those still on the earth a taste of what eternal punishment will be like. I saw a star from heaven, which had fallen to the earth, and the key of the bottomless pit was given to him. He opened the bottomless pit, and smoke went up out of the pit like the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by the smoke of the pit. Then out of the smoke came locusts upon the earth. Revelation 9, 1-3. As you look at this, you see that a fallen star, which in this case is very likely a fallen angel because he's called he, is given the key to the bottomless pit. Some listening to this teaching might say, see, hey, wait a minute. A fallen angel opens the bottomless pit, not CERN. But what if the key that he's given is knowledge on how to run the experiment in CERN to open the portal? So that's a possibility. But more important than that, and what the key is when the bottomless pit opens. It's after Jesus returns and the saints are taken into heaven in safety. The fifth trumpet is something that happens likely within the final year of the tribulation. So that should give you a timetable. And after the bottomless pit is opened, demonic locusts are released, and they sting all unbelievers on earth. But they aren't allowed to sting believers, those who come to Christ after his return. If CERN is responsible in part for this opening up of the pit, won't that be a very unpleasant surprise to these atheist scientists at CERN? And the king of the bottomless pit, the destroyer, he's in charge of those monsters. So the king of the atheists and the elites, the one they're looking for to come back, is going to bite them, literally. So what happens next at CERN? That is a big question. They are planning on building a much bigger and much more powerful collider. After 4 years of research, a new 100-kilometer long Future Circular Collider, FCC, interesting letter combination, is coming, roughly 4 times the length of the previous Large Hadron Collider. Here's what CERN physicist James Beecham said about it. An idea like the FCC is something our species has never done in history, ever. Any time you go to do something that's so boundary stretching, that is so beyond what anyone has ever envisioned. Is this the key the angel is given that unlocks the bottomless pit? Well, perhaps it is. What is the relationship between the king of this bottomless pit and the fifth trumpet and the 4 angels who are chained at the Euphrates River and who come out at the 6th trumpet? Click right here to keep watching and learn what the 4 angels do and how they're released and how they're related to the king of the bottomless pit. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.